Good morning and welcome to this final day of our course on two kinds of love, on neighborly love and other kinds of love. So we started with some questions. We could ask ourselves these questions and many others. What is happening with human sexuality? We see lots of different states around us. So what's going on? We can ask ourselves, why is marriage becoming increasingly unstable? Why do many experience conflicting needs to express their creative and intellectual abilities and to be good spouses and parents? And why are some attracted to the opposite sex while others are attracted to their own sex or both sexes? So these are some of the many questions we are trying to answer during this weekend. And here I want to distinguish between two types of love. Martinus talks about two kinds of love. And it's much easier to do it in Danish than it is in English, because Danish has two very clear words: forelskelse, which is a kind of love that we feel when we fall in love. And in the translations, I've chosen to call it amorous love. Maybe I'll find something better at a later stage, but for the moment, that's what I've called it in English. And the other kind of love, which is alkærlighed or kærlighed, is universal love. So Danish lends itself very easily to this distinction, where English really doesn't. This amorous love, falling in love, it can also be infatuation, but infatuation is a very strong word. So it's maybe gone a bit too far, but they're quite clearly two different types of love. And they're based on two different types of sexuality, which we looked at a bit yesterday: the one-poled sexuality and the two-poled sexuality. And here's a quote from Levy's book, volume 5. He says, while the basic principle of animal one-poled sexuality is that a being devotes itself only to a specific being of the opposite sexual nature, the basic principle of purely human or two-poled sexuality is simply that everyone devotes themselves to everyone. That's a very, very big difference. So if we look at this symbol, which we also looked at a little bit yesterday, we see here these two one-poled beings who are joined in a sexual act. In this case, it's intercourse. We see the male being on the right, dominated by the male pole, the green color, with this latent feminine pole in the center. And the triangle means it's a living being. And then we have on the left, the female being with a latent male pole in the center, the green, and the triangle symbolizing that this female being is also a living being. So here we have two living beings. But these crosses mean that they're sort of tied together in a sexual act, in intercourse, or if it's animals, copulation. And this creates a kind of artificial double-poled being. So the one is dependent on the other for getting this sort of instantaneous and very short-lived glimpse of the divine. Whereas in the other figure, this one living being has both poles dominating. We can see it more clearly above, where the male pole and the female are equal in both beings here. And this means that the being is totally independent and experiences God in everyone and everything without exception. But if we go back to this one-poled situation, we can see what happens here. If this sexual act between a man and a woman is perfect, so to speak, then it can result in the birth of a child. And this is what we see here. We see the male being on the left with all his basic energies. So we can see that the animal energy, sorry, the energy of gravity, the orange color, is dominating. Feelings are developing. Sorry. Intelligence is growing, and so on. And we see that this cross, this flaming cross in the middle, means that this man is engaged in sexual intercourse with a woman on the right here. And during this sexual culmination, which we see in the middle, then contact is established with a being on the spiritual planes, a discarnated being who's in the sort of queue to be born. We see these two very large rays, the yellow ray to the left and the yellow ray to the right, that they meet and they create this sort of common aura. He calls it an aura of bliss. And the being on the spiritual planes is on a wavelength with this aura. And sorry, sorry, this is, I've lost control. That's it. So this being is on a wavelength with the common wavelength of this couple. And it means that the being can then incarnate. You see these threads going down and wrapping themselves around the mother, so to speak. So this is the incarnation process where the being from the spiritual planes connects itself with the embryonic material in the mother, and the beginning of the creation of a child is, it starts. So this is how we come to the world. So in a way, it's very clever that in this way, the process of reincarnation is connected with this experience of the divine. Otherwise, eternal life would not be guaranteed. So that was the one-poled sexual act. The double-poled sexual act demands completely different conditions. Martinus quote, and here's a quote here. He says, and not until the terrestrial human being's present physical one-poled being has been changed so as to become the instrument for the two-poled sexuality's physical act of culmination, does the finished or perfect human kingdom or kingdom of heaven exist, not merely in a mental or spiritual form, but also in a purely physical form on the terrains of the earth. Terrestrial mankind then begins to consist of individuals that are organically created in order to love one another 100%. So we see here that there has to be an organic basis for this, for universal love. At the moment, we are somewhere between this one-poled state and double-poled state. But in the purely one-poled state, we are organically created in order to love one person to the exclusion of all others. And we are undergoing a change where we open up, we get friends, we have platonic relationships, our ability to stay in love. We can fall in love many times perhaps, but our ability to stay in love degenerates. But a new organic ability is growing. And it will grow to be 100% so that one can love one's neighbor as oneself. But it takes this new organic structure. So unlike the one-poled sexuality, which is based on intercourse, the new sexuality of this double-poled state will be based more on caressing. He talks about sexuality based on caressing, and the last part of this will be centered around the mouth and the tongue, which are already very, very sensitive. And we use the kiss. You can see in the pictures here, you can kiss children, you can kiss your wife or your girlfriend or your husband and so on. Men can kiss men, women can kiss women. It's a sort of universal way of caressing. And Martinus says that this will develop, and that the whole body will develop to become very, very sensitive. He says here, the feeling of culmination manifests itself through the organic feeling that is today in the process of evolving through what we know as the kiss. People's growing tendency to kiss, which is of course something relatively new in evolution, was not originally part of the one-pole act, and is thus a manifestation of the sexual effects of the opposite pole in the being that now, albeit unconsciously in the being itself, begin to make their presence felt. And he goes on to say, since kissing does not belong to the sphere of one-pole sexuality, every one-pole being that feels the need to kiss during the one-pole sexual act has already, to a corresponding degree, become derailed from the sphere of one-pole sexuality in favor of the two-pole state, a state in which kissing will one day be the actual act of sexual release. So we talk a lot, some people talk a lot about foreplay and so on today, and I don't know so much about sexual therapy, but I know that there's very often focus on avoiding intercourse and increasing this caressing and kissing. And in a way, that's really sort of promoting the new thing. Yeah, so to the extent that you want to kiss your partner of the opposite sex or the same sex, then you are heading towards the new sexuality. He says, in order for there to be contact and a climactic sexual release through kissing, both parties have, of course, to be on the same wavelength or very closely related sexual wavelengths. Such a closely related sexual wavelength can exist only between the tongue and lip cells of two-pole beings, cells that are supplied with a two-pole sensitivity that now dominates all the other microbeings of the organism. Here, the parties' mutual touching through kissing can give rise to such a mutual similar reaction that this can be the highest and most perfect sexual climactic release. So here we're seeing that the body will become much more sensitive than it is now. We talk about erogenous zones.
Yes, and,
the lips and tongue are certainly more sensitive than many other parts. Sexual organs, of course, are very, very sensitive, but he talks about the entire organism becoming more sensitive. Let me just see where I was with this. Yeah, so we saw this symbol yesterday, and we see that as the opposite pole develops in our consciousness, then it runs parallel to the growth of neighborly love. That's this figure here. I hope you can see my cursor. I forgot to change it. And this happens through the result of dark karma. Here we see the principle of life after life, after life, after life, after life. And the white squares are the time spent in the spiritual worlds between incarnations. And we see that when we send out some sort of dark action, maybe you kill somebody, you can be killed in the same life. Or you say something nasty to someone and someone says something nasty to you. The same here, it could come back in the next life, or it could come back in 2 lives or in 3 lives and so on. And what we see here is this yellow flame growing, and this is the flame of neighborly love. So if for example, in 3 lives' time, I couldn't have the heart to do what I did in the past, this karma wave would be neutralized, and I would be non-receptive to its effects. So we see here that through this feedback from the universe, we get karma for the actions that we have carried out, both the positive and the negative, but it's particularly the negative ones that help us grow in neighborly love. So this is the motor, the driver behind the evolution of neighborly love. And here we see, again, the principle of karma, or the principle of reincarnation at the bottom. We see life after life after life after life at the bottom here. But we see a development from the orange color to the yellow, which means from the energy of gravity or killing or aggression, where you respond to your fate by with the attitude an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And gradually, as you suffer the effects of this, more compassion, more understanding comes into your reactions. And in the end, you begin to forgive and understand. And when that kind of reaction is every reaction, then you step into this double-poled, universally loving state. So we see in the middle here this living being who's receiving some sort of dark karma. And he meets it, or she meets it, with love and understanding, and sends out a warm, loving, compassionate wave of karma that will come back. So the more that we learn from the consequences of our evil or unpleasant actions, the more we will progress out of the animal kingdom, this one-poled state, to this totally two-poled state. And this involves a completely new organic structure. Thank you very much. Yeah. So Martinus talks about three sexes. He talks about the male sex, the female sex, and the human sex. And he describes the male and females as one-poled and as sexually half beings. And this harks back to the symbol we saw at the beginning, where the one half needs the other in order to be complete. Whereas the human sex is two-poled and is sexually a whole being. And if we just go back to the symbol, we can see here that here we have the male being in this part on the right, with the green color dominating. Here we have the female being with the yellow color dominating. But we see that the opposite, the green and the yellow, is growing in each of them. And here we have the human sex. So here are the three sexes: male, female, and human. So I hope that's clear. Yeah, and he, I'll just go back to this. He talks about various stages in the development of this double-poled state, or the development of the human sex. And in Livesbo 5, he talks about human beings A to K. And I won't go through them all, but I could just mention that towards the bottom here, we have the reproductive types I talked about yesterday, who only live for their partner and for their children, their home, and so on. That's their entire sphere of interest. They're not interested in anything else. One could say at that stage, the honeymoon lasts one's whole life. We'll skip over the B stage, and then the C stage. Where are these two stages in evolution? The C stage is what he calls the zone of unhappy marriages. It's also what he calls the zone of unfinished creative talents. And here one can say that one's talent for marriage has degenerated more or less, to a greater or lesser extent. And this leads to a lot of problems that we're very familiar with. We talked yesterday about divorces and unhappy relationships, or you could be in love with someone who's in love with someone else, and so on. So it's a very disruptive period. But the positive aspect of this C stage is one's relationship to society. Here you could be interested in art and literature, music, science, politics, and so on. And you could have a very, very high moral standard in relationship to society and be very self-sacrificing. But all these interests outside your one-poled relationship compete with the relationship in a way, and that's part of the reason why the marriages become so complicated. So the talent for being of a benefit to society is growing. The talent for being creative is growing, although it's still imperfect. But we're in this sort of transition period where the one-poled sexuality is causing us problems because it's degenerating, but the secondary pole, our interests in everything outside the home, is growing. And then further on, there are various bisexual and homosexual stages. Some of them very, very, very highly developed morally. He mentions some categories where a bisexual or a homosexual has a very, very strong relationship to God. And this keeps them, or keeps us from going off the rails, so to speak. There are some derailed states as well, and he talks about those, but they are things like sadism and masochism and prostitution and so on. So, but not everybody has to go through that. And the later one wakens up in one's opposite sexual pole, the less problematic this transition will be. So, and he talks a bit about how important it is to really protect children and not to misuse children sexually, because it can really waken things up too early and give them a lot of problems in their later life. There are some who remain heterosexual almost until cosmic consciousness. So their consciousness about the opposite pole in their consciousness, it doesn't wake up until very late on. So some people will have sexual feelings for their own sex earlier, and some will have it very, very late. The later it comes, the less problematic it is. Even though one isn't sexually attracted to one's own sex, one can have very, very deep friendships with one's own sex. And we see today people have friendships with both one's own sex and the opposite sex. And then we cross this line, which is very important. This is where we become totally double-poled. And we become double-poled in the body, the kind of body we had. So we can become mentally double-poled in a male body or a female body. And an example of this is Christ, who was totally all-loving but had a male body. But later on, we will get a totally different kind of body. So he talks about the sexual organs as we know them today becoming rudiments and or remnants, but the sensitivity of the organism will really develop, and we will the sort of rugged contours of the man as we know him today will be softened, and the woman will become more boy-like, and we'll get this sort of one-poled, double-poled and more androgynous body. So that was a very, very lightning journey through ACK, but I can recommend you read it for yourselves in Livsbog 5. So we go on. So I think one thing I can say about these sexual stages we see today, that they're all transitional stages. The heterosexual stages, the homosexual stages, the bisexual stages, they're all transitional stages. They're not the final goal or the final result. He says that the result of our current evolution will be the creation of an entirely new kind of being, a real human being. And as I said, he describes males and females as two half sexes that must unite with one another in order to feel happy and fulfilled. And to repeat, Martinus describes the experience of sexual union as nothing less than a brief glimpse of God himself. In the darkness of the animal kingdom, which is based on the principle of killing, the sexual experience provides a light, an experience of bliss that can help us and the animals through the darkness. And the human sex is a whole sex that has the two sexual poles completely in balance, a balance that results in a permanent experience of the spirit and presence of God in everyone and everything. So I started with some questions. Maybe I could end with some possible answers. Martinus says that marriage is becoming increasingly unstable. Sorry. Because of the growth of the opposite pole in us, which is leading to lots of interests outside family life. Art and science, the growth of culture, and other people in general. So we're developing many platonic friendships outside our families, which nourish us in various ways and meet needs in us that our families perhaps cannot meet. And this is perfectly natural. So our ability to be in love with the same person for our whole life degenerates. And the growth of the opposite pole also means a growth in our need to express ourselves creatively in many different ways. This can give rise to a conflict between devoting time to our children and spouses and spending time on various kinds of study, on creative projects, politics, science, and other fields of interest. And our sphere of compassion and interest has grown to include other people and other areas as well. So when we're not just interested in looking after our own spouse or people of our own country, but we see catastrophes and people give money to the Red Cross or whatever, our sphere of compassion widens and widens, and it will eventually become all-encompassing. But Martinus stresses that as long as one has children, this is one's primary area of responsibility. So we saw that people's attraction to their own sex can be explained by the growth of the opposite sexual pole. And that for a long time, this pole grows quietly and unnoticed, and it manifests itself only as human warmth and compassion for others, as well as an interest in art and science and so on. But at some point, one begins to have sexual feelings for one's own sex. And this is, of course, not something one should force or in any way try to accelerate. It's best if it just happens by itself. So when this happens, a man begins to experience life through his feminine pole and a woman through her masculine pole. And I would say that on this sexual evolutionary journey, it's very important to be morally alert, because what we see and what we talked about yesterday is that even though the one-pole sexual state is degenerating, our sexual drive is not. In fact, it's increasing. And this can lead to a lot of painful situations. For example, if you're heterosexual and you fall in love with one person after another, after another, after another, you can leave a whole chain of people behind you who are really hurt and really upset and totally brokenhearted. So it's I like the term moral alertness, to be on the lookout. You know, is this person expecting the same from this relationship as I am? Can they take it if this relationship doesn't last very long and I find someone else or whatever? So it's very important, I think, to sort of look at one's expectations to one another and look at where one is in this situation, so one is very honest and doesn't leave someone in a difficult situation. We see a lot of women, for example, particularly women, left alone with children and this kind of thing. And this can be very difficult, both in many ways, emotionally, financially, and so on. Martinus urged people, when people asked him for advice, he said, don't promise more than you can keep. But I think if you combine that with this moral alertness, that you're tuned into your partner, and so for example, someone who really doesn't want any kind of long-term relationship, but just wants to have a very brief encounter, if he or she is together with someone who really is looking for a long time, a lifelong relationship, somebody's going to get hurt in the process. So it's very good to be aware of these differences in where we are in this sexual evolution, I think. Martinus says here in Liebesbow 5, a human being whose morals and ethics are stronger than its sexual drive need not fear in any way that its future zone of sexual transformation will be a sphere of unhappiness, apart from the ordinary pangs that always accompany the birth of a new epoch. Everyone must inevitably go through the sexual transformation. No one can continue being a male or female being. So, but I think this is really important, that one's morals and ethics ideally should be stronger than one's sexual drive. And of course, we see that often they aren't, like people's sexual drive is so strong that they don't pay any heed to the ethics of the situation. And one can say that sexuality in religions and in spiritual traditions, it's not been very highly regarded. I think Martinus really elevates sexuality by saying that it's an unconscious experience of nothing less than God himself. It's a light, an experience of bliss that can help through the darkness of the animal kingdom. So I think what we can say to sum up is that Martinus provides a framework for understanding ourselves sexually and in many other ways, and perhaps where we're headed. So we can ask ourselves, are we heterosexual, bisexual, homosexual? Are we somewhere in between? Are we in a kind of no man's land? Sexuality is evolving, and we can ask, well, where is it taking us? And Martinus provides a lot of answers to these questions. There's certainly something is happening. We see it all around us, that there's a lot of change going on in the whole sexual sphere. So, and I can really thoroughly recommend reading Liebesbow, the Book of Life, Volume 5, where he goes into a lot more detail about all of that. So that's all from me.